All right, we are at chapter 7. Sociology of Deviance is where we're going today for this week. So, my goal here is just to kind of provide you a framework over chapter 7, introduce some ideas, kind of get you situated into this particular chapter, and just kind of hopefully provide a framework that makes the reading more enjoyable and that you can kind of see things a little bit more clearly as you kind of go through the material for this particular week. Sociology of deviance, it's a fascinating, I think everything in sociology is fascinating, right? In this area, what we're interested in, if we go back to that social fact piece, right, we're interested in social and cultural forces that influence how we define, how we explain, how we identify deviance, how we understand sort of the factors that are involved in the creation not only of categories of deviance, but of human behavior. And then thinking about the social control mechanism, how we respond to what's been identified as deviant behavior. So it kind of takes us macro level, micro level, kind of all around in terms of sociological stuff, right? Let's give you an example. Think about, cigarettes and smoking. And in 2017, Oregon became the 5th state in the nation to increase tobacco use to 21. So you have to be 21 or older in order to purchase tobacco products. That was in 2017. It became the 5th state to do that. Well, it's kind of fascinating to look at the history of cigarettes and in the United States, or you could do this in any country, right? But I'm just going to focus here in the United States. It wasn't until the 1960s, 1970s that a lot of more medical research was coming out about the harmful effects of smoking. Before that, smoking cigarettes, what did they mean, right? Interactionist perspective. How do people understand them? What kind of moral worth did we assign? What kind of moral worth did we assign to individuals who were smoking? A lot different today, right? So smoking hasn't changed. Still the same product for all intents and purposes. What's changed is the meaning that we assign to it, the regulations around it. And those regulations and meanings, I think, are attached. They influence each other. And that we can look at a lot of different things with cigarette smoking. We can look at that historical development. We can look at issues of power. So when research was coming out exposing or identifying the harmful effects of smoking, the tobacco industry started to work in a direction to undermine that research, to become critical of that research, to try to move and sell product in ways that could maintain their bottom line. And that became a strategy for a long time. There's this concept called the merchants of doubt. So when tobacco was confronted with this, when more and more research was coming out, public relations gurus in New York were working with tobacco industry and basically told the tobacco industry, your job and your focus should be on not to provide counter evidence of the healthful effects or to undermine the research. It's to create doubt in the public, to sell them on something different, sell them on something new, to undermine the research indirectly in a different way. And they were able to do that for a period of time until the 1980s. And that became, there was testimonies before Senate committees. Tobacco executives were caught basically lying and deceiving the public. And the public lost interest in listening to the tobacco industry trying to defend cigarette smoking or tobacco consumption in general. But the tobacco industry is alive and well. They're a global network, right? So seeking new consumers in different markets and also trying to get into the American market in different ways today. Vaping becomes kind of that example. So a lot of it has to do with how we think about the particular thing. So let's kind of walk through a couple of different theories and a couple of different ideas. So in sociology of deviance, we're interested in 3 things. We're interested in the actor, the act, and the setting or the context. So kind of walk through each of those. So the first is the actor. So with smoking cigarettes, who is the actor? Male or female? Social class, race, region of the country. So the actor sometimes makes a difference. So we detach the criminal act or the deviant act or the deviant behavior from the actor. So we could say, marijuana consumption. Do we assign a different meaning to it based on a person's social class, their race, their gender, these kind of things. Well, maybe not. I think some things are a little bit more, you can see them more visibly where the actor becomes important. Binge drinking. I like to use this example in class that so somebody's beer bonging, right? So 5 beers in a big funnel and just taking that beer down in one huge jug, right? So if a female engages in beer bonging, do we assign a different judgment of that versus somebody who's male? Or I like to think about using class to say, okay, my mom lives in a retirement community, and if I were to go over to one of the retirement part or go over to a function that they have, and I see somebody over in the corner, or I see a bunch of people gathered around their beer bonging, they're 70 years old, I think I'm going to think about that differently than if they are 22 years old and in a college setting, right? Or in a different social setting. So the actor becomes important. So that's one level of analysis. The act becomes important to sort of identify too. So we have the status of the actor, and then we have the act. So what is it that we're talking about? What area of deviance or crime are we talking about? The act and how we see it changes across time and place. Marijuana is another classic example. During the marijuana scare of the 1920s and 1930s, the belief was that if you smoked marijuana, you could commit rape or murder and other just bad stuff in society, right? And this is the Federal Bureau of Narcotics got established, I think it was 1937, and there was a marijuana scare that was going on at the same time. There's race factors that are entering in here too. Oftentimes when we have drug scares, we're also, there's a kind of a reaction against race too going on. So in the 1930s, Latino community and the Hispanic community, there was a lot of judgment being placed on marijuana in that particular community, African Americans as well. So the act and how we see the act is oftentimes very subjective, cultural, historical, and it moves and shapes. It's that social construction starts to come into play, right? So that the act itself doesn't have an inherent meaning. Smoking marijuana doesn't mean anything, neither good nor bad, indifferent, doesn't really matter. It's we assign meaning, culture does, and we individually assign meaning to it. And we act on our meaning. So we have to think about that process when we think about the act. So we got the actor, and then we have the setting. So the context is important. So I can engage in certain kinds of behavior in one context, then I shift context and engage in the same behavior, and it's going to be a problem. Or I may be viewed by some as being deviant. Behavior, so the act and the actor hasn't changed, the setting has changed. Okay? So if I go to, I don't think of an example. So if I go to a concert here in town and it's an outdoor concert, and I look over and my physician is smoking a marijuana cigarette, and I look over and whoa, for one, okay, I got the actor going on here, so it's my physician. What do I think about that? The physician occupies a certain position. I assign meaning to that. So does that status of the actor shape my perception of the user in this case? Then I got the act in terms of smoking marijuana. Well, it's legal, how we define that, both culturally as well as individually. And then I got the setting. So it would be different in that setting, in a music setting versus if I was in a different setting, right? So I move the setting and the context around that behavior. It may be defined differently. The sanctions may be different. The reaction may be different. Same behavior, but the setting changes. And the setting can matter in terms of how we view and evaluate things. Okay, so having said that, let's kind of move into the 3 theories, just kind of give you a little kind of some tidbits here and there in the 3 different theories. The first theory, functionalism, there's branches underneath or deviations underneath functionalism. But I talk about the big broad stroke functionalist perspective. For Durkheim and for the functionalist perspective, deviance serves a vital function. There's no way you could remove all deviance from society, and neither would you want to. Durkheim studied, he went to a monastery and studied monks for a period of time. And in that environment of a lot of informal social control, very scripted in terms of what's required and norms and expectations, even in that environment, the monks identified deviant behavior because through identifying deviant behavior, they could reinforce what was right. So part of the functionalist analysis is to say deviance helps to draw moral boundaries between what is right and what is wrong. It helps to distinguish between the insider and the outsider. So it helps to create social solidarity among those who are opposed to a particular thing. So it's about social solidarity. It creates unity for those who are opposed to something or deciding that that thing is morally wrong. It can affirm values. So through deviance, and we're talking about deviance in a community or as a society, we're kind of affirming what our own value is. What is it that we stand for? What is it that we represent? And these things are all helpful for building a consensus and building stability, would be the argument from a functionalist perspective. Now, I want to provide a little bit of information about Merton's strain theory, which is a functionalist idea as well, just to kind of clarify, because you're not going to get it from the reading, I don't think. Merton, he's a functionalist because he sees the institutions and the cultural values. So there can be different degrees of strain in a community, depending on, one, the number of resources that are available for people to reach the cultural value. For America, we place a lot of focus on the cultural value of the achievement of the American dream. So the more economically successful you are, right, the more status you have in our community. That's not a bad thing. That's okay. The challenge becomes when different parts of our community and different people don't have the resources to get the American dream. It creates a lot of strain in those communities. And when people are under strain, they may respond in different ways, right? So he identifies in this box diagram that most people conform, but you get innovators, you get people who retreat. Innovators would be like drug dealing, right? Making money, trying to get the American dream. They believe in the American dream. They understand that economic success is a valuable part for gaining access to things, so they'll innovate. People may retreat. They may remove themselves from culture and get involved in a drug-using subculture or do other things to remove themselves from society. These are about structural things. These are individuals operating within structure. And then there's rebellion. Every once in a while, people may rebel, and they may redefine the cultural goals to say, you know what, that vision of the American dream isn't what the American dream, and we need to redefine that to make it more realistic. Or we may provide more opportunities and more resources to decrease that strain. A lot of during the Johnson and Kennedy administrations back in the 1960s, the war on poverty was really about trying to decrease strain by offering programs like Head Start, provide early education opportunities, to provide more resources in poorer communities to help deal with this issue of strain. So that's one application of functionalism to that. Interactionist perspective has to do with the way we assign meaning, the symbols, the way we assign meaning, and how those things start to affect our identity. So look at the label of being a criminal or an ex-convict. Think about the power of that particular label on a person as they apply for a job, apply for housing, whatever it may be. That label is powerful in terms of shaping a person's future opportunities. Interactionism gets us into thinking about how we construct meaning. Going back to that example of marijuana, how have we constructed meaning over a course of time? What are been the agents that have been involved in that? Why have we changed our meaning about that? I think the fascinating thing about marijuana, I think a large part we've changed our meaning because the middle class and those that are, the middle class, those are in dominant positions, saw this, they want, it became a benefit, right? Something that if it was advocated for by different parts of our community, I'm not sure if we would have supported legalization. I think we also started to see things like, medicinal use of marijuana absolutely became sort of a start of that conversation. Slowly, Americans changed their mind about marijuana. And also there's a huge tax benefit, right? States are benefiting from a tax benefit standpoint, and that's beneficial to the overall income for a particular state. So changing meanings of things. One of the things you read about is postmenstrual or premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It's a great example of constructing a new condition out of something that it's not that people haven't experienced some of these symptoms, it's that we're labeling it a disorder. That becomes the question, that becomes the issue. It becomes labeled as a psychiatric condition. So that means there's going to be a medicine that's going to follow to help individuals with this particular condition. So the question you have to ask is, once we create that label, do now all of a sudden we start to see these conditions in ways that we didn't see them before? Maybe that's sometimes helpful, provides aid and assistance for some, but maybe all of a sudden we're creating an environment where we start to see things that weren't there before, and we put a disorder to it. I think that's problematic, right? So if it's a biological thing going on, a biological thing that's happening, is it not a medical condition versus a psychiatric condition. So you got to start to kind of think about kind of the industry interests that are served in creating these conditions becomes something to think about. And then finally, conflict theory. The war on drugs and critiquing the war on drugs is really a conflict theory analysis. But I think, as you're watching those videos on the war on drugs and reading some of that information, I think the preponderance of evidence is that absolutely race and class were involved in the creation of the war on drugs. There's a lot of other things, of course, that are going on there as well. The war on drugs definitely had a huge impact on impoverished communities and largely communities of color. We have a different reaction, for example, to the opioid crisis, right? So we humanize that more, I think in part because that affects all social classes. The middle class and the upper class can empathize with that in a different way. For the drug scares of the 1970s and 1980s, there's a lot of political opportunism there. There's a lot of politicians that are playing on race and class fears and anxieties. And rather than dealing with the structural conditions, the economic inequality and disparity that's going on in the 1970s and 1980s, as we move away from manufacturing in these cities and unemployment goes up and crime goes up, rather than dealing with the structural problems, we say it's a problem of drugs. And there's a big critique about whether or not the CIA and the American government was involved, to what extent, in supporting or bringing actually cocaine into these cities. So you got a lot of stuff going on that kind of complicates that factor. In conflict theory, you look at the war on drugs, this is a war against people of color, a war against the poor. This is not about sensible, pragmatic, helpful policy. This is about political opportunism, and this is about something different. So hopefully you enjoy all those readings. It's a fascinating area, this sociology of deviance. And with all of this stuff, I think the idea is to become informed and educated, to become aware, not that there's only one way to think about it, but to raise questions. And the more that we raise questions, we become more informed, more educated, and we can become more empowered to create better social policies that not only make our communities safer and better, but also save us money and resources so we can use them in different places. $40,000 to $50,000 a year for putting someone in prison for a drug crime, depending on the drug crime, it's just a misappropriation of funds. And there's become more and more critique of that. So hopefully you enjoy the readings and the videos. Thanks for all you do. Have yourself a great day.